Hey everyone, welcome to the learning materials for this week's module where we're going to be talking about food, culture, and society. So we know that culture plays a critical role in how people eat, their identities, their rituals and understandings, and even how they construct what healthy food is. And while culture is defined as the beliefs, behaviors, traditions, and the customs that we learn both consciously and subconsciously in the environments that we grow up in, the role of culture as a main driver in the food system can still remain elusive and hard to see. So, as we learned in this week's reading, to make meaningful change, however, in the food system professionals, including public health professionals, really need to really need to understand the critical role that cultural processes play in bringing about healthy populations. So, to probe at the meaning of food and culture, we're going to be talking about the theories and findings of three different individuals. I'm going to introduce you very quickly to Pierre Bourdieu and how his studies show that tastes, the influence of socialization and class on tastes. Carol Devine in her work on the role that work has on food choices and identities. And then lastly, George Ritzer and his theories on the industrialization of food and its influences on how we eat. Now, Pierre Bourdieu's work is quite extensive, but I think to understand it, we have to start with one of his principal tenets, and that is that capital comes in multiple forms: economic, social, and cultural. Economic capital is probably the easiest to understand and measure. It's the amount of money, for example, that one might have or not have in a bank account. Cultural capital is the sum total of one's knowledge of established cultural activities and practices. And this, when it comes to food, could be either the know-how or the lack of skills around cooking, for example. And then social capital is the sum of all the resources one accrues by virtue of being connected to a network of people. And it's important also that these forms of capital can be interchanged. One example might be for someone who has a group of friends, and in that group of friends, there's someone who really knows how to cook, or a chef, for example. And someone might be able to exchange that social capital for cultural capital and having that friend teach them how to do some recipes. Likewise, economic capital within this analogy could be used to purchase cooking skills, for example, by going to a cooking class. Now that's quite simplified, but some examples to try and show how these forms of capital can be interchanged. Now, when it comes to food, Bourdieu studied he studied many groups with different professional backgrounds and varying economic, social, and cultural capital when it comes to food. And he wrote that tastes in food also depend on the idea each class has of the body and of its effects on food on the body, that is, on its strength, health, and beauty. It follows that the body is the most indisputable materialization of classed taste. So to really articulate how tastes are socialized, Bourdieu then went and constructed this food space based on the observations in a French society several decades ago. He constructed the food space, which is this visual that shows, for example, that with a group that has high cultural capital and lower economic capital, this group might be inclined to eat healthy, natural, sweet yogurts and fruit juice, jams. And then on this side, we have cultural capital, lower cultural capital, but higher economic capital. So this group might be inclined to eat more rich, strong, fatty, salty foods, spices, wines, spirits. And then down here we have lower cultural capital and lower economic capital. And we can see here that Bourdieu suggests that this group might be inclined to eat salty, fatty, heavy, strong, simmered foods. So to show and to highlight, right, that there are many forms of capital and that the group follow these patterns in terms of the taste that they prefer. And that although, again, tastes seem like a very personal thing, that in fact there are social and cultural drivers behind what we eat and why we eat it and how we eat it. So next, I want to talk just briefly about Carol Devine's work. This is a study that she did from a propulsive sample with 51 individuals, looking at the spillover of work onto food choices and the family roles in a low and moderate income urban households. And I think this is so interesting when we think about food identities and how those play out in relation to work. And what she found is that when jobs are demanding and limiting, this is self-reported from the individuals in the study, and the work characteristics are long hours, overtime, shift work, inflexible, and there's really low resources in terms of energy and fatigue and time, that it ends up, the strategies for getting food end up being skipping meals, eating out, taking out, eating more junk food, and then this ends up having a negative affect in terms of feeling like guilty, feeling like a bad mother, overdoing it, no time for family and health. But interestingly, when the job is actually defined as demanding but manageable, so this is with characteristics that are the work life balance seems, or the work is flexible. These people can work at home. There's help at home, and there's the resources available are that there's a good cook, and there's shared ideas, and there's support at work. And this ends up having a positive effect in terms of pride in the efficiency and satisfaction in terms of the strategies used in terms of planning ahead and cooking ahead, having multiple meals, and then also taking food and fruit from home. So I think I wanted to highlight this study as it's mentioned in our reading, and I also think it's an important study when it comes to thinking about food identity, the role of work, and then also in terms of gender. Lastly, George Ritzer brings us some really interesting ideas around food and the industrialization of food and how it plays out in our culture. So he writes about McDonaldization, and he defines it as the process by which the principles of the fast food restaurant are coming to dominate more and more sectors of American society, as well as the rest of the world. So what is McDonaldization? This slide shows the dimensions that you've read about or will read about in the readings this week. So this is defined as efficiency. One of the dimensions is efficiency, and this is the optimum method for getting from one point to another. So thinking about the drive-through, the most effective way to get from being hungry to getting full. And so we're very, one of the dimensions is this efficiency. So calculability, this emphasis on quantitative aspects of products sold and served. And then offered. So this is thinking about portion sizes, cost, dollar menu, even the ketchup dispenser is all calculated. Next is the predictability. So this assurance that products and services will be the same over time in all locations. So the same menu, for example, at fast food restaurants, at a McDonald's, it's the same menu at all locations. The Egg McMuffin will be the same in New York as it is in Chicago. And it offers this element that we often call it's like having a non-space. So you can't actually tell where you are geographically when we're inside some of these places, because it's all the same. It's all predictable when it comes to these types of fast food places. And then the last one is control. So this is non-human technology comes to exert control over human workers and the customers. So there's control in the lines and limited menus. George Ritzer even writes about uncomfortable seats, so people have to come in quickly or come and then leave quickly. And workers are also controlled in what they wear and what they say and how they move. So this element of control is also an important dimension that's written about. Now, lastly, this critique of McDonaldization is that although it can offer many benefits, there are also huge downsides to this. And in this class, I've already talked about many of them, and also read and heard from you that we know the downsides of an efficient, calculated and predicted and controlled food system. So this fifth dimension that he writes about is the notion that so much rationality actually leads to an irrational system. And I think that we could point to many different places in the food system that are quite irrational, from the health of our populations to climate change. So George Ritzer also wrote about vertical McDonaldization, and this is potato growing to chicken raising and meat slaughterhouses that have, again, become so efficient that they're really inefficient and irrational in many ways. So in talking about the health and environment, how health and environment are negatively impacted by this process, George Ritzer concludes with, in short, if the world were less McDonaldized, people would be better able to live up to their human potential. And I think that this is a really important theory to understand in thinking about the food system, because we can see these dimensions both in our local, state, national, and even global food systems. So at all scales, we can see this irrationality. Not that scale has to necessarily equal irrationality, but I think the dimensions that are articulated here are really important. So I'll look forward to hearing your comments and critiques on this, and good luck.